My husband's final request wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't peace. It wasn't love. It was a name. A name I hadn't said aloud in years. My husband asked me to love another man while he was dying. That was the first thing he said when I walked into the hospital room. The words scraping out of his throat like something torn loose from the inside. No greetings, no explanation, just that broken sentence hanging in the air like smoke from a house fire. And I remember my hands shaking so violently, I had to hold them against my stomach as if pressing them there could anchor me to the floor. I wish I could tell you I misunderstood him. I wish I could say the morphine made him delirious or that he didn't mean it. But Trey looked at me with those dark, exhausted eyes I'd loved for nearly a decade, and whispered, "Brenna, please, promise me you'll go to him when I'm gone. To him, not to my family, not to my friends, not to grief counseling or faith or healing, to another man." You're probably wondering who I am and why I'm telling you this. My name is Brenna Hart, and before I tell you anything else, before I even try to explain what this story really is, I want to thank you for being here. Stories like this, real, messy, painful stories, they're the heart of this channel. So if you're watching, please subscribe to Possible Hearts, leave a like to support this video, and tell me in the comments which city or country you're watching from. I genuinely love reading where each of you is listening from.
Okay, whew, deep breath. Because the truth is, my story doesn't start in that hospital room. It starts long before the machines, before the diagnosis, before the secrets, even before the wedding vows Trey and I exchanged. It starts with a feeling, a quiet, pulsing ache I carried for years. The kind of ache you don't talk about because it feels ungrateful or dramatic or somehow wrong, even though it whispers to you at night, telling you that something in your life doesn't quite fit. That ache lived in me from the early days of my marriage. And for a long time, I told myself it was normal. Lots of people feel it, right? The something is missing sensation, the soft grief for a connection you can't name. But in my case, that ache had a shape, a shadow, a memory of a love that didn't make sense. Because once, many years ago, I'd fallen for someone I never saw, a stranger behind a screen name, a voice made of words, a soul I felt like I knew before I even knew my own. And somehow, that connection haunted me for years afterward. I didn't know then that the stranger had a real name. I didn't know that he was someone who'd been right in front of me all along. I definitely didn't know my husband had anything to do with it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The night Trey made that request, he looked empty, like something had been burning inside him for years, and now the fire had nothing left to consume except him. He reached for my wrist, his fingers trembling, the skin on his knuckles pale and thin. He rasped, "Brenna, you have to listen. You have to find him. You have to let yourself love him. He's the only man I ever trusted with you." His words hit me with all the force of betrayal and grief and disbelief crashing together. Only man he trusted with me? What does that even mean? What kind of husband says that? For a moment, all I could do was stare at him, the beeping monitor counting down the seconds I was losing. His chest rose in shallow waves. Sweat glistened at his hairline. The fluorescent lights carved hollows in his cheeks, making him look like a stranger wearing my husband's face. "Trey, what are you talking about? Who?" My voice cracked, and I hated how small it sounded. how can you ask me to do that? He swallowed hard, slow, painful. He whispered, because I stole something from you and from him, and I can't die with it. That's when something cold crawled under my skin. Stole what? He didn't answer. His eyes closed, like he was drifting, but I could see, clearly, he wasn't escaping the conversation. He was gathering what strength he had left, as if the next words would be the heaviest ones he'd ever spoken. When his eyes opened again, there was a single tear at the corner. Trey never cried, not even the day he proposed. His lips parted. There's a truth I hid from you, a truth about your heart and mine and his, a truth I should have told you years ago. My pulse thudded so hard I heard it in my ears. Who is he, Trey? I demanded, breathless. Who am I supposed to find when you're gone? He looked at me quietly, looked into me, then said the last thing I ever expected. He's the man you were meant to love, the one you loved first, before you ever loved me. My entire world tilted, because the only man I'd ever loved before Trey was someone who never had a face, someone who might not even have been real, someone I thought I lost forever, the nameless voice I fell in for college. And Trey, my husband, my partner, the man I built a life with, he knew who he was.
People always told me how lucky I was to have Trey Barrett. And honestly, in the beginning, I believed them. He had that kind of presence that filled any room he walked into. Shoulders back, smile warm, voice smooth as honey. He was the type who made waiters laugh, charmed bosses without trying, remembered everyone's names, and always offered to help someone carry something or fix something or solve something. To the world, he was effortless. But behind closed doors, Trey was someone else entirely. Not cruel, not violent, not even obviously unkind, just calibrated. Every reaction measured, every expression controlled, every word chosen like a man composing a song only he could hear. It took me years to realize that I was dancing to a rhythm he set without ever saying a word. The first red flag, if I can call it that, was so small I almost missed it. We were at a friend's birthday dinner, a loud, dimly lit restaurant in Chicago, back when we were still in our 20s. I had laughed too loudly at something Josh said, something genuinely funny, something that made me forget myself for a moment. Josh always had a quiet humor, the kind that snuck up on you and landed warm in your chest. I remember turning to Trey, hoping he'd laugh too. Instead, he just watched me. Not Josh, me. His smile was tight, controlled. The corners didn't reach his eyes. Later, when we got home, he wrapped his arms around me like everything was normal and whispered, almost teasing, "You get so easily impressed sometimes. It's cute." At the time, I laughed. I thought he was just being playful. But a week later, when I told him a story about a funny coworker, he said, "You really think that's funny?" And suddenly, I didn't know anymore. A seed of doubt planted itself in me, but softly, quietly, the way weeds creep into a garden before you even notice. Trey had that effect on me. On everyone, really. He never insulted, never raised his voice. He simply made you question your own instincts. And he did it so gently that you almost felt guilty for noticing, like when he'd sigh after I tried to tell him about my day. "Brenna, you make everything sound more dramatic than it is." Or when I'd express excitement over a song or a book or something simple, and he'd say, "That's sweet. You're always so emotional about things." Or when I'd bring up something that bothered me, and he'd reply, "We talked about this already," even though we hadn't. But the worst part, the part I still struggle to forgive myself for, is how often I believed him. That's what subtle manipulation does. It makes you doubt the parts of you that used to feel strong.
It trims your confidence like someone pruning a tree too aggressively. It makes you smaller without ever raising a single hand. But back then, I still thought Trey was perfect. Still thought our problems were just normal relationship glitches. Still thought he was the man who had written the messages I treasured, the ones that shaped my heart, the ones that made me fall in love with the idea of him. Because that was the real cruelty of all of this. Trey didn't just manipulate my emotions. He manipulated my memories. He let me believe he was the man behind the words that once made me feel seen. I love the way your mind works. You make the world feel quieter. I think if I ever loved someone, truly loved, it would be someone like you. Those messages, those soul-deep pieces of connection I carried with me for years were the anchor that kept me from drifting away when our relationship had cracks. And Trey knew it. Whenever I pulled back, confused or sad or longing for something I couldn't name, he always said something that triggered those old memories. I still think about the way you described your childhood, the thing about the magnolia tree. It meant a lot to me. Except I had never told him about that tree. I told the stranger, the one whose words felt like pages torn straight from my own heart, the one who understood me without trying, the one whose messages I reread for years in secret, not out of betrayal, but because they reminded me who I was before I started doubting myself. Looking back now, I can see the pattern so clearly it hurts. He would sense the exact moment I started slipping away, the exact moment my intuition whispered that something wasn't right, the exact moment I felt the ache again, the ache of missing something I couldn't name. And then he'd say just the right thing, something gentle, something deep, something that echoed the man I fell for in college. But not his words, Josh's. I didn't know at the time, not consciously, but every time Trey spoke with a tenderness he didn't truly have, every time he pretended to understand something he had no way of knowing, every time he mimicked the emotional intimacy I shared with the faceless man, my heart reacted, not to him, to the echo, to the illusion, to the lie. And I told myself, see, you're fine. He loves you. You're imagining things. That is the scariest part of subtle manipulation. You start policing yourself. But there was one night, one conversation that should have warned me, should have made everything clear. The night Trey said something so strange, so haunting, that even now, after everything, I can still hear it echo when I close my eyes. We were lying in bed in the dark, a storm rumbling outside. I remember the faint smell of rain through the cracked window, the faint glow of passing headlights washing over the ceiling, and out of nowhere, Trey whispered, "Sometimes I feel like you're waiting for someone who doesn't exist." At the time, I didn't understand, but he did. He knew exactly who I was waiting for and exactly why.
If Trey was the man everyone else saw, then Josh Butler was the man I felt. Even before the messages, before the late-night confessions typed between homework assignments and microwave dinners, there was something about Josh I couldn't quite name. A steadiness, a quiet gravity, like the world calmed down just by standing next to him. We met during sophomore year at Northwestern. I was carrying 3 textbooks I didn't need and a coffee I definitely did when I stumbled over a broken tile outside the student center. Everything flew. Books, bag, dignity, the coffee that cost half my weekly budget. I expected someone to laugh. Instead, a pair of hands lifted my scattered notes before I could even blink. "You okay?" a soft voice asked. I looked up. Josh. Tall, worn hoodie, hair always a little too long.
eyes that seemed like they saw things without judging them. I remember thinking he looked like the kind of guy who apologized when someone bumped into him. "I'm fine," I said, brushing coffee off my jeans. "You're not," he said, gently. "Your pride is hurt." He smiled, a slow, warm, crooked smile that made the whole moment feel lighter. I didn't know then that this quiet, awkward man would become the center of a storm I couldn't yet see. We started as friends, study partners, a pair of introverts who found comfort in silence. We'd sit in the library, sometimes for hours, not saying much, just sharing the same table. And yet, somehow, those were the moments I felt seen. One night, we were reviewing for a midterm. We both knew we were going to fail. I was exhausted, half delirious on sugar and stress. When I blurted, "Do you ever feel like you're meant for something deeper?" His pencil stopped mid-sentence. Then his eyes met mine, slowly, intentionally, all the time. Something in his voice cracked open a window in my chest, but nothing happened. Not then. Not with him being quiet and me being, well, me. We never crossed the line. We just lived on the edge of something unspoken, a connection without a name, a heartbeat without a rhythm, a feeling without a face. The messages started 2 weeks later. A simple notification, a username I didn't recognize. No profile picture. Unknown. "I saw your post about the magnolia tree. Most people don't describe childhood memories like that." I froze. It wasn't creepy. It wasn't flirtatious. It felt familiar, like a voice I had heard before, somewhere inside myself. I should have ignored it, but I typed back, "Me." It was the only place I felt calm growing up. Then, unknown. Calm doesn't come naturally to everyone. I think that's why your descriptions feel like home. Home. The words slid under my ribs and settled there. Within hours, he knew things about me I never told anyone. My fear of disappointing people, my habit of writing down thoughts I never said out loud, the way I always noticed details no one else cared about. And somehow he understood it all, in a way Trey never did, in a way even I didn't. Whoever this stranger was, he had a way of peeling back layers inside me without forcing anything open. With each message, the connection deepened. The jokes, the confessions, the late-night emotional unraveling that only seems possible behind a screen. The kind of intimacy that feels like destiny, or foolishness, depending on who you ask. Back then, I called it destiny. Of course, I didn't know it was Josh, not until years later. But the signs were there. Little things. Like how, after those messages started, Josh suddenly grew quieter around me. Not distant, just cautious, softer, almost as if my presence had become a wound he was trying not to touch. There were moments when he looked like he wanted to say something, like the words were burning holes in him, but he never did. Instead, he watched, gently, painfully, with a longing I was too young to recognize as longing. I remember one particular night, one I've replayed in my mind more times than I can count. We were sitting outside the dorms, sharing a blanket in the cold because neither of us was ready to go inside. The campus lights made halos in the fog, and you could hear the distant hum of traffic on Sheridan Road. He looked at me for a long moment, too long, then said, "You ever think timing ruins everything?" I laughed it off then, assuming he meant exams or internships or the 100 other things stressing us out. But looking back, I know he was asking me something else, something bigger, something fragile, something like, would things be different if I told you how I really feel? But before I could even respond, Trey walked up behind us, loud, confident, the sun to Josh's moon. "Come to a party with us," he said, waving a bottle in the air. "Both of you." Josh stiffened beside me. I didn't know why then. I know now. Because the moment Trey arrived, The quiet world Josh and I shared disappeared. And I followed Trey without understanding what I was leaving behind, without realizing the damage already beginning. Because 2 days later, the messages changed. They became sharper, more confident, slightly different in tone, like someone imitating someone else. I didn't realize it, not then, but the soul-deep connection I treasured was about to be stolen, hijacked, redirected toward a man who wasn't meant for me, toward Trey, toward the beginning of the lie and the end of the life I thought I was building. I remembered the exact moment everything shifted. The stranger wrote, "I think you and I are meant to find each other." And at that same moment, almost as if he had rehearsed it, Trey called, "Hey, I've been thinking about you." My heart jumped because in my young, naive mind, I truly believed the voice behind the phone was the same soul behind the messages. I thought fate was aligning. I thought something beautiful was beginning. I didn't know it was the moment everything I'd ever wanted was being stolen.
People always talk about betrayal like it's loud, like it arrives with shouting or slammed doors or a dramatic confession. But the truth is, the deepest betrayals don't scream. They whisper. They slip in quietly. They wait until you trust the moment. And then they alter your life with a click. That's exactly how it happened. One small click. One message sent by the wrong hands. One choice that Trey Barrett made in the dark, without hesitation. A choice that rerouted all our lives. It began with a study session. I was in the common room of our dorm, half asleep over an economics textbook. Trey and Josh were down the hall in their shared suite, pretending to study and mostly talking about a trip they wanted to take after graduation. I remember walking in to ask Josh something about our class and finding him alone, sitting at his computer, headphones around his neck, his brow furrowed. He startled when he saw me. "Oh, hey," he said, minimizing the screen instantly. "What's up?" At the time, I didn't think anything of it. Josh was private, quiet, careful with his feelings, his words, his space. I asked my question, he answered in that gentle way of his, and I left. But in those few seconds, those tiny, unremarkable seconds, his messages were open, and Trey saw them. Because the moment I left, Trey came in. I didn't know any of this then. I only learned it years later. But I've replayed it enough times in my imagination to picture it clearly. Josh's door still open, Josh walking me out, kind as always, his computer unlocked, the messages with me glowing on the screen like an exposed heart, and Trey curious, competitive, hungry for attention in a way he never admitted. He stepped inside, leaned down, read everything, every vulnerable word Josh had typed, every confession I had made, every shared moment of emotional intimacy, a private world that wasn't his. And instead of closing the laptop, he sat down and started typing. At first, just to see if he could mimic the tone. He told me later he was just messing around, that he didn't mean anything by it. But something took hold of him. A thrill, a jealousy, a fear that Josh was about to win something Trey didn't even know he wanted until he saw how badly someone else wanted it. He wasn't drawn to me, not at first, not romantically. What hooked him was the realization that Josh had something Trey didn't, a part of me.
He told me later, I couldn't let him beat me. Not again. Again. That word haunts me. I still don't know what he meant. But that night, the night he typed out a response pretending to be the stranger, everything shifted. Because I received a message. Unknown. Sorry I disappeared. Just thinking about you. It felt a little different than usual. Bolder. More confident. But I didn't question it.
I replied instantly, and Trey saw my message pop up in real time. He watched the little typing bubbles appear as I poured my heart into a space that no longer belonged to the man I thought. He realized then, really realized, how connected I felt to this stranger, how deeply I trusted him, how my face softened when I read the messages, how I lit up in ways I didn't with Trey, how I wore that tenderness like a secret, and something in him snapped. Possessiveness, competition, insecurity, ambition, or maybe all of it, because instead of stopping, instead of walking away, instead of letting things happen the way they were meant to, he leaned closer to the screen and claimed something that was never his: me, my feelings, my vulnerability, my future. He answered as the stranger again, and again, and again. That's how the theft began. Over the next few days, I noticed little things: a shift in tone, a new type of confidence, a slightly different sense of humor. I told myself people change tone all the time, but there was something else, something I didn't notice until years later. The messages suddenly referenced things I said in front of Trey: my stories, my habits, the way I brushed my hair behind my ear when I was nervous, things I had never told the stranger. But I didn't question it. I just thought, oh, maybe he's paying more attention than I thought. That was the illusion Trey wanted, the illusion he crafted, the illusion I fell for. And it worked. Because when Trey finally asked me out, I said yes. Not because of who he was, but because of who I thought he was. Because of the man who had written those messages. Because of the connection I felt in every line. Because of the warmth, the depth, the soul. Except none of that soul belonged to him. And on the night of our first date, while he walked me home hand in hand, his smile bright and easy, Josh stood at his bedroom window, watching quietly. He thought I chose Trey. He thought he'd lost before he even tried. He never knew his best friend had stolen his voice, and I never knew the stranger I loved was standing right upstairs, watching the girl he adored walk away with someone else. The betrayal didn't feel like betrayal back then. It felt like fate. But looking back, that night was the beginning of everything that broke, everything that spiraled, everything that followed me into adulthood and into the cold silence of that hospital room. Because the truth is, Trey didn't steal my messages. He stole my destiny. And he didn't stop there. The worst was still coming.
If falling for Trey felt like fate, then being married to him felt like trying to hold smoke. Beautiful. Savor every second. But I remember almost nothing. Just flashes, colors, sounds. Trey's hand too tight around mine, his smile a little too perfect, the applause hugging us like a warm blanket I didn't quite deserve. I smiled through it all, of course. I played the part, we both did. But deep down, I carried a truth I didn't dare say out loud. I wasn't marrying the man who had captured my heart. I was marrying the man I thought he was. The man from the messages. The man who wrote like he could see through me. The man whose words felt carved out of my ribcage. The man who wasn't Trey at all. Our marriage began with soft promises and quiet mornings. Trey brought me coffee in bed. He left notes on the counter about dinner plans. He bought flowers on random Tuesdays. On the surface, everything looked perfect. But surface is just surface. Inside the seams, something was always missing. A silence, a distance, hollow space I could never fill. Whenever I tried to get close, emotionally, deeply, Trey shifted. If I opened up about a fear, he'd smile gently and say, "You're overthinking again." If I cried after a hard day, he'd kiss my forehead and whisper, "You're just tired, babe. Don't worry about this." If I needed reassurance, real reassurance,
he'd murmur, "You're making this bigger than it is." And just like in college, just like in the beginning, I questioned myself, my feelings, my instincts, my memories. Meanwhile, Trey kept weaving little threads from the stolen messages into our life, like embroidery patches hiding rips in old fabric, like the night we were eating Chinese takeout on the floor of our new apartment. He looked at me with this soft, almost nostalgic expression and said, "I still remember when you told me about writing your thoughts in that little notebook you hide in your purse. It made me fall for you." My heart stopped because I had told the stranger that, not Trey, but he said it so casually, so confidently, with such quiet intimacy that I doubted myself. I remember thinking, did I tell him? And just forgot? That was the dangerous part of his manipulation. He never forced a lie. He let me swallow it willingly. He made me trust him more than I trusted my own memory.
The years passed in a blur of almost happiness. Dinners with friends where Trey held my waist just a little too tightly. Parties where he sparkled for everyone except me. Nights where he pulled away when I reached for him, only to apologize later with a kiss that felt rehearsed. He wasn't cold, just absent. Emotionally absent in the way only someone skilled at pretending presence can be. The kind of absence that makes you feel silly for noticing. The kind that leaves you lying awake wondering why the person next to you feels miles away. And through all of it, one thing haunted me. The messages. Or rather, the ghost of the man behind them. I never found him. Never learned who he was. Never knew why our connection ended so abruptly. The stranger vanished, and I convinced myself Trey was the reason, because he told me everything I wanted to hear. He mirrored the emotional depth I craved. He replayed lines from a love story that wasn't his, lines that belonged to another man, lines I carried in my heart like prayer. And even though something inside me felt wrong, felt incomplete, felt like a truth was hiding behind the curtains of our life, I stayed. Because marriage is supposed to be hard. Because commitment matters. Because love, I told myself, was a choice. But with every year that passed, the choice felt lonelier. Sometimes I'd wake up at night and stare at Trey's silhouette in the dark, feeling like I was lying beside a stranger. And sometimes, on the worst nights, I'd wonder if that stranger had been the one I was meant to love all along. Meanwhile, Josh disappeared. Not abruptly, not dramatically, just slowly, like someone fading from a photograph exposed to sunlight for too long. At first, he missed a few group dinners. Then he was busy with work. Then he moved to a different part of the city. Then another state. Then nothing. No calls, no texts, no traces. Whenever I asked Trey about him, he shrugged and said, "You know Josh, he drifts." But the sadness in his voice wasn't sadness. It was relief. Trey never liked sharing space with anyone. He especially didn't like sharing emotional space. Years later, I would learn the truth. Josh didn't drift. He was pushed. Pushed by the weight of the stolen messages. Pushed by the belief that I had chosen Trey over him. Pushed by an event that shattered his life. Something Trey did in secret. Something lightly illegal, but devastating. Something that sent Josh's future spiraling. Something I knew nothing about. Not yet. But the signs were there. The empty holiday card, the unanswered voicemail, the quiet sadness I felt whenever I thought of him, the sense that someone I should never have lost was slipping through my fingers. I didn't know it at the time, but fate was already rearranging itself. The truth was coming, and soon I would learn why Josh disappeared and what Trey did to make sure he stayed gone.
The first sign that something was wrong with Trey wasn't a symptom, it was a silence. A long, heavy suffocating silence that settled over our house like fog. He wasn't talking. Not the way he usually did, not with that charming ease, that effortless warmth, that polished smile he used with everyone else. He just withdrew. At first, I thought he was stressed. Work had been overwhelming, deadlines piling up, the company undergoing some kind of restructuring he refused to explain in detail. But there was something else in his eyes, something I had never seen before: fear. Not paranoia, not worry, but fear that lived in the bones, a fear that wakes you in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat. And every time I asked what was wrong, he would say, "I'm fine, Bren. Don't worry about it." Except his voice didn't match the words. His voice sounded like a man hiding behind a wall he could no longer hold steady. By the time he finally agreed to see a doctor, he was already losing weight. His hands shook when he thought I wasn't looking. He would stop in the middle of a sentence, staring into space like he had forgotten the world existed. The diagnosis came fast, too fast, aggressive, unexpected, the kind of illness that strips months into weeks, weeks into days, and days into the last few breaths of a fading life. Cancer. Stage 4. No warning, no mercy. Trey took the news like someone who had already known. He nodded at the doctor, polite as always, thanked him, shook his hand. But when the doctor left the room, he crumbled. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly. His shoulders sagged, his hands trembled. The mask he had worn for years finally slipped. I sat beside him, numb. "Trey," my voice broke. I sounded young, far younger than my 29 years. "We'll get through this. I'll be here. I'm not going anywhere." "No," he whispered, looking at the floor. "No, you're not." The way he said it made my stomach clench. He didn't sound grateful. He sounded devastated. He changed after that. The man who controlled every detail of his world suddenly let everything fall apart. He canceled work meetings, stopped answering texts, stopped shaving, stopped pretending. For the first time in our marriage, Trey let the world see him without his armor. But that vulnerability didn't bring us closer. It only revealed how far apart we'd always been.
He wouldn't let me hold him, wouldn't let me comfort him, wouldn't let me sit beside him for too long. Sometimes he would stare at me like he wanted to say something. Other times, he looked at me like looking hurt too much. I didn't understand. Not until the guilt started leaking out. Not in confessions, in fragments, little cracks. Like the night I found him sitting on the bathroom floor, shaking, not from pain, but from something deeper. "It's all my fault," he whispered. "All of it." I knelt beside him, terrified. "Trey, what are you talking about?" He squeezed his eyes shut. Everything I touched, I broke. He looked up at me then, those dark, exhausted eyes heavy with a truth I couldn't yet see. "You deserved better." I wanted to argue. I wanted to reassure him. I wanted to be the wife I had promised to be. But something about the way he said it made the room feel colder. Like he wasn't talking about the illness. Like he was talking about something else entirely. The decline was fast, faster than the doctors predicted. One moment, he was walking. The next, he was struggling to breathe without assistance. Our bedroom turned into a quiet battlefield, machines humming, medication bottles lining the dresser, blankets piled on the chair from sleepless nights. Trey asked to be moved into hospice sooner than expected. "He don't want to die at home," he said softly. "Not in the life I stole." I froze. "The life you what?" He didn't answer. He just stared out the window. The night of his request arrived like a storm without thunder, a cold front of dread settling in my chest as I walked into the dimly lit hospice room. He looked smaller, so much smaller.
His once broad shoulders had collapsed inward, his cheekbones sharp, his skin pale like paper that had been touched by too much light. But his eyes, those dark, calculating eyes, were finally honest. There was no charm left, no mask, no gentle manipulation, just truth, weak, trembling truth. "Close the door," he rasped. I did. When I turned back, he was staring at me with a desperation that made my throat tighten. "Brenna, I need you to listen." His voice cracked. "My time's almost up." Tears blurred my vision. "I'm here," I whispered. "I'm not going anywhere." He shook his head. "Just barely, but enough. That's the problem." Silence. Thick. Suffocating. Then, "I need you to find him." My heart stopped. "Him? Who?" "The man I took from you." I felt the world tilt under my feet. "Trey? You're not making sense." "He am," he snapped, weak but sharp. Then softer. "I am, Bren. Please don't make this harder." I stepped closer. "What are you saying?" He swallowed, wincing, as if the truth itself hurt his body. "For years, you've been living a marriage built on a lie. I created, a lie I fed, a lie I stole." My pulse thundered. "What lie?" His eyes filled with tears. "The one that mattered most." He reached for my wrist, barely, but enough for me to feel the tremble in his fingers. "He loved you first." The words hit hard, hard enough to knock the breath from my lungs. I don't understand." "You will." He closed his eyes, exhaling a painful, broken breath. "Josh." My entire body went still. "Trey, what about Josh?" He opened his eyes again, and for the first time in all the years I'd known him, he looked truly afraid. "He was the man you were meant to love, the man whose words you fell for, the man I pretended to be." My heart stopped. You stole the messages?" He nodded. Tears slid from the corners of his eyes. "And that's not all." Heat flushed my skin, my ears rang, my breath fractured. "What else did you do?" Trey looked at me with a hollow, haunted expression. "I did something illegal, and I did it in his name." The world tilted in on itself. The walls blurred. My lungs seized. The air felt suddenly too sharp to breathe. "Trey, tell me." But he was already fading, already slipping, already drowning in his final truth. "Find him," he whispered. "Love him. He's the only man who ever truly loved you." And then his hand fell from mine, his breath stilled, the monitor screamed, and everything I thought I knew about my marriage collapsed into ash.
People talk about grief like it's a single emotion, like it's one heavy thing you carry in your chest, but that's not true. Grief is a swarm. Shock, anger, confusion, guilt, denial, hollow silence. And then, beneath all that, the truth you don't want to face. When Trey died, all I felt was the swarm. The room collapsed into noise and light, the flatline on the monitor, the nurses rushing in, the scent of antiseptic burning my throat, my own breath coming out in broken animal sounds. I didn't cry at first. I just froze, staring at the body of the man I'd built a life with, the man who had held my hand through every holiday, every move, every milestone. The man I thought I knew. The man who had just confessed to stealing the deepest connection I'd ever felt and destroying the life of the one person who truly loved me. I wasn't a widow. I was a stranger standing inside a life that suddenly wasn't mine. They asked if I wanted time alone with Trey. I shook my head. I couldn't look at him without seeing everything differently. Every smile, every kiss, every whispered "I love you" now cracked open like glass. The man who died wasn't the man I married. Maybe he never had been. He had said, "Find him."
love him. I stole your life. Those words looped in my mind like a fever. Josh, Josh, Josh. The man who had disappeared without a goodbye. The man whose sadness I never understood. The man who had stared at me sometimes like he was holding back entire galaxies inside his silence. The man Trey had destroyed. How? Why? What had he done? What did lightly illegal even mean? My mind raced with possibilities. Identity theft? Forged documents? Something financial. Something that could ruin a career, a reputation, a future. I needed answers. But the only person who knew the full truth was gone. Or so I thought. The next day, still dizzy from grief, still raw, still unable to digest anything but water, I returned home to find an envelope on the kitchen counter. My name, written in Trey's handwriting. No stamp, no delivery mark. He must have left it for me before the hospital, or someone from his office found it and delivered it when I wasn't home. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a key, a familiar one, the key to his locked office drawer, the one he kept everything in, the things he never let me touch, never let me open, always kept locked with a small silver padlock. I went to the office, knees trembling. The drawer clicked open, and my world cracked for the second time in 24 hours. Inside was a folder, thick, overstuffed, bulging, labeled Josh Butler Confidential. My heart stopped. I pulled it out with trembling fingers. Inside was documents, emails, forms, printouts, letters, and a handwritten note from Trey. Brenna, I don't have the courage to tell you this in person. I hope one day you'll understand that I loved you, even as I failed you. Please, find him. Ask for forgiveness. Give him the life I stole. Trey, my hands went numb. I opened the folder, and the truth spilled out.
Trey hadn't just stolen the messages. He hadn't just manipulated our relationship. He had sabotaged Josh's career intentionally. In an act of jealousy so deep it bordered on obsession, he forged Josh's signature on a document tied to a corporate project, something involving misreported financial data, something that counted as fraud, something that got Josh investigated, something that forced him to resign, something that blacklisted him from entire industries. My stomach turned as I read through the papers, copies of the forged forms, emails Trey sent from spoof accounts, lying to HR to make it look like Josh had admitted guilt, a letter from Josh's employer terminating him, notes in Trey's handwriting mapping out the entire plan. He can't stay here. He won't stay near her. If he thinks he failed, he'll distance himself. She won't go looking. My breath caught. Trey hadn't just pushed Josh out of his job. He pushed him out of my life by destroying his reputation, by taking away his future, by shattering his self-worth. I gripped the edges of the folder so tightly they crumpled. This wasn't lightly illegal. This was life-altering. This was cruel, calculated, unforgivable. Trey, my voice broke into a whisper. What did you do? But I knew. I knew exactly what he did. He destroyed the man he felt threatened by, the man he knew I loved before I realized I loved him, the man who had loved me quietly, honestly, selflessly, Josh. For hours, I sat on the floor surrounded by evidence of Trey's betrayal, feeling like the walls were closing in. The memories flooded me. Josh's sudden disappearance, his quiet sadness near the end, his reluctance to talk about work, his avoidance of me, his move to another state. He didn't leave because he wanted to. He left because he believed he had failed, because he thought he wasn't good enough for the world, and certainly not for me, because Trey made sure he believed that. And the worst part, I had let it happen without even knowing. My breath trembled as I whispered his name into the empty room. Josh, where are you? I knew what I had to do.
I packed the documents, every page, every lie, every piece of proof Trey left behind. I put them in a bag. I grabbed my car keys. My heart pounded as I drove toward the last address I knew Josh had lived at, years ago, before everything fell apart. The apartment manager told me he had moved, twice, no forwarding address. He was disappearing everywhere I looked, but I didn't stop. I couldn't, not after knowing what Trey had done, not after hearing Trey's final plea. Find him, love him. He's the only man who ever truly loved you. I searched online. I called old classmates. I followed old job listings. I pieced together every scrap of information I could find. And then, finally, a lead. A small town 2 states away. Someone who remembered a quiet guy named Josh Butler, a mechanic shop where he'd worked for a while, then a rumor he'd recently taken a job restoring old cabins on a rural property. My heart raced. It had to be him. It had to. So I drove, hours through winding highways, forests of bare November trees, rain streaking across the windshield like tears. Every mile carried more fear, more guilt, more hope I daren't name. By the time I reached the town, night had settled. I found the address. A small cabin at the edge of the woods, faint light glowing through the windows. I stepped out of the car, my legs trembling. Every breath felt like a prayer. Every memory felt like a wound. Every step forward felt like stepping into the past. Back to the library, back to the magnolia tree, back to the messages that shaped my heart, back to the man who had loved me quietly before everything was stolen from him. I walked to the door, raised my hand, and knocked. The porch light flickered. Footsteps approached. The door opened, and there he was. Josh, older, rougher, eyes tired, expression guarded. And when he saw me, really saw me, his entire body froze. "Brenna," he whispered. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out, because I was standing face to face with the man whose heart I had unknowingly broken, the man my husband destroyed, the man whose words had defined my soul, the man Trey begged me to find, and I had no idea if he would let me speak.
For a moment, we just stared at each other. Josh stood in the doorway, one hand still on the knob, the cold night air drifting between us. His hair was longer than I remembered, his jaw sharper, his shoulders heavier with a weight I couldn't see but could feel. He looked like a man who had stopped expecting softness from the world. And I felt like a ghost from a life he'd buried. "Josh." My voice broke on the second syllable. He didn't move, didn't smile, didn't frown, just searched my face as if trying to decide whether I was real. "What are you doing here?" he finally whispered. Not harsh, not hostile, just tired, wounded, guarded. I swallowed hard. I came because I learned the truth. His breath caught, but subtly, like he didn't want me to see the crack. "What truth?" I lifted the folder in my hands, the one Trey left behind, the one filled with every terrible thing he'd done. "About the messages," I said softly. "About the way you disappeared, and about what Trey did to you." Josh flinched, like the words were physical. His eyes closed for a brief, fragile second, as if the past had just reached out and grabbed him. "I don't want to talk about Trey," he said, but there was a tremble in his voice that told me he did, or maybe he needed to. I stepped closer. "Josh, he confessed." "He did what?" "He told me everything, right before he died." The air shifted. A muscle in Josh's jaw tightened, then released. He stepped back and opened the door wider. "Come inside." His cabin was warm, dim, quiet. Wood walls, a small fireplace, tools on a workbench, coffee mug half finished on the counter. A life built out of solitude. I stood in the center of the room, feeling like an intruder. Josh leaned against the table, arms crossed, not in defiance, but in protection. "Tell me," he said. So I did. Everything. I told him about the deathbed confession,
the stolen messages, the identity theft, the forged paperwork, the sabotage, the reason he lost his job, his future, his sense of worth. I laid it all out like broken glass between us. Josh didn't interrupt, didn't look away. Only when I mentioned the forged documents did his fingers clench around the edge of the table. When I finished, the room felt unbearably quiet, a quiet so thick it pressed against my chest. "I'm so sorry," I whispered. "Josh, I had no idea. I never would have chosen him if I had known who was really—" He stopped me with a small shake of his head. "Don't," he said softly. "You don't owe me an apology. None of that was you. But I suffered because of me." He let out a hollow breath. "He suffered because he loved you." My heart jolted. He wasn't angry. He wasn't bitter. He was simply telling the truth. "I thought," he continued, "that when you chose Trey, that was it. That I wasn't the guy you wanted. That I'd imagined something between us that wasn't really there." I stepped closer, tears burning behind my eyes. "What I felt with you was real, Josh. I just didn't know how to name it back then." He looked away. "The night you and Trey started dating, I deleted the anonymous profile. I didn't want you to think I was trying to interfere. I thought I was doing the right thing." "You were," I said, voice shaking. "You were the only one who didn't lie." He laughed, but bitterly. "No, the lie was mine first. I hid behind a screen name because I was too scared to tell you in person." "That wasn't a lie," I whispered. "That was fear. There's a difference." He looked at me then, really looked. And for the first time in years, I saw the man I remembered. The man who sat with me under campus lights. The man who understood my silences. The man whose messages felt like soul prints. I took another step toward him. "I fell for the man you were," I said. "You always were." He swallowed hard. "And yet, you married him." The words held no accusation, only grief. "I married the man I thought you were." A silence, sharp, deep, unavoidable. His eyes softened, just a little, but enough. "I don't know what you want from me, Brenna." "I don't know either," I whispered. "I just know I couldn't let Trey's lies be the last word between us." Josh looked down at his hands calloused now from hard work, hands that once hesitated every time they brushed mine. "I don't know if I can go back to who I was before. I don't know if I can be that guy again. I'm not asking you to be him. I'm asking if you'd be willing to rediscover who you are now with me." The fire crackled. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees. In the quiet of that small cabin, surrounded by the bruised memories of our shared past, something shifted. Not a grand gesture, not a cinematic kiss, not an instant reunion. Just a step. A slow, careful, trembling step toward hope. Josh exhaled softly, as if releasing years of tension. "Maybe," he said, "maybe we can start with a conversation." My chest loosened. For the first time, I feel like I'm exactly where I should have been all along. He nodded, slow, uncertain, but sincere. A beginning. Not perfect, not guaranteed, not easy, but real. And maybe that was enough.
Thank you for watching this Possible Hearts story. If it moved you, please don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Real stories, real hearts, real possibilities.